Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm thrilled to be here with what's left of my voice after a week of exciting events to talk about small business climate action. Small businesses truly are the backbone of the US economy. There are 30 million SMEs, so small and medium-sized enterprises or businesses with fewer than 500 employees in the country. And over the past 25 years, they have created 2 of every 3 jobs in the country. So it's fair to say that local communities depend on the health of American small businesses. But these companies are up against really tough challenges. They've bounced back from the 2020 economic shock, and now they're having to deal with soaring inflation, surging energy prices, and supply chains that are breaking down. So they need support. They need support and they need solutions to become resilient businesses that are fit for the future. And that brings us to climate change and climate action. We are all aware of the extreme weather events that are affecting the business community. Floods, hurricanes, wildfires, heat. All of this is closing businesses, it's disrupting supply chains, and it's also changing the ecosystem that these small businesses operate in. We're seeing a shift in the expectations of buyers, consumers, investors, government regulations. We often see these economic issues in isolation from the impacts of climate change, but the truth is that they can both be addressed at the same time. And this is where the SME Climate Hub comes in. The Hub is a joint effort of the Women Business Coalition, the Exponential Roadmap Initiative, and the United Nations Race to Zero campaign. And today, in partnership with America is All In, we're launching a campaign to help US SMEs cut carbon and cut costs at the same time and really become resilient businesses that can survive and thrive in these changing economic times. For American businesses, it is becoming increasingly clear that taking action is a straightforward business proposition. It's a win for companies' profitability, it's a win for the US economy, and it's a win for the planet. But we know that small businesses face specific challenges. They often don't have the capacity, the bandwidth, the in-house expertise to take action, to add another project to the list, even when their business would actually benefit from it. And this is why at the SME Climate Hub, we're working really hard to create a conducive ecosystem where taking climate action for small businesses is not only the right thing to do, but it's also a simple process with clear business benefits. We have 3 tools and resources that can help SMEs measure their emissions, educate themselves on climate, take action, make a commitment, and report on their progress. So the Hub truly is the best place for small and medium-sized enterprises to start their journey on net zero. And it's also the best place for corporates to send their SME suppliers to so that they can start working on Scope 3 emissions, especially in their long tail of small suppliers. We now have over 5,000 businesses, small businesses, who have made the SME climate commitment on the Hub from 107 countries. This figure includes US SMEs, but we'd like this number to go up, increase exponentially. We want as many US SMEs as possible to use the platform, which is why, as part of our campaign, we're now working with US headquartered corporates, city administrations, business organizations to really spread the word. In just a few minutes, you'll be hearing from our panelists, climate leaders from government, from businesses, large and small, on the importance of small business climate action and how we can accelerate this movement. But in the meantime, I'd like to give a really warm welcome to Assistant Secretary of State for Energy Resources, Geoffrey Pyatt, who's going to say a few words before the panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pamela, and good morning, everybody. Huge thanks to the Women Business Coalition and America is All In for hosting this launch event. This is literally my very first week at the State Department as our Assistant Secretary of State for Energy Resources. And I'm really honored to start off that tenure by recognizing the critical role that small and medium-sized enterprises play in our energy ecosystem. I also want to congratulate the SME Climate Hub for its United States launch. 30 million American SMEs form the backbone of the US economy. They account for nearly 2/3 of net new private sector jobs in recent decades. They are integral to our country's economic health and to carrying out the economic transition and combating climate change. We simply won't be able to meet our ambitious climate targets without America's SMEs being part of the effort. And I think most American SMEs recognize that we can't afford inaction. SMEs have to protect their operations from the effects of climate change, and they have to adopt more cost-competitive and efficient energy sources. So that's why I'm delighted to see initiatives like the SME Climate Hub expand efforts in the United States. For 100 years, energy has been central to America's position as a global leader. And recent actions by the Biden-Harris administration are helping ensure that we retain that leadership position as we all work through the transformation of our energy system from one focused on fossil fuels to one driven by renewable sources. It's an overused phrase, but I truly believe that we are at an inflection point in history. Global energy markets are in the midst of a profound shift, as falling clean energy technology costs and supportive policy environments combine to upend the economics of the power sector. Renewables are increasingly cheaper than their fossil counterparts. Coupled with improved energy storage and efficiency, they are disrupting traditional energy markets in a profoundly positive way. But unfortunately, the organic pace of energy transformation is not sufficient to meet either our climate or energy security goals. And that's where government policy comes in. The Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, represents an historic investment of $369 billion in climate and clean energy. The IRA will drive innovation and create unprecedented market demand for the technology and resources required to meet climate goals in the United States and indeed globally. The IRA will help to reinforce the US market as the most agile in the world in mobilizing finance for the energy transition. SMEs will also be able to leverage this immense private sector opportunity at many points along the value chain. Indeed, SMEs will often be best positioned to identify strategic clean energy opportunities, enabling them to innovate, to grow, and hire more rapidly, and thereby succeed in the global market. Thanks to the IRA, SMEs will now sell and install solar kits, heat pumps, water heaters, and EV charging stations at an unprecedented scale. SMEs that crack the code for low-carbon construction materials will spur beneficial market demand shifts. All along the supply chain, thousands of components will be needed and will need to be manufactured for turbines, inverters, batteries, and other solar equipment, not to mention the opportunities likely to emerge from frontier sectors like hydrogen, carbon sequestration, small and modular nuclear reactors. SMEs providing the climate-smart products and components sold around the world are an important part of our pathway to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. We look forward to talking more about how SMEs can help decarbonize the global supply chain at COP27 and to partnering with the SME Climate Hub in these efforts. The 5,000 SMEs that made climate commitments on the Hub and joined the UN's Race to Zero will need to purchase clean energy to power their global operations and build supply chains that meet their climate commitments. Larger corporations that work with SMEs are also striving to meet their own corporate pledges. Many of these companies' energy demands are equal to that of a sovereign nation. If they can meet their clean energy commitments, it will stimulate economic growth and reduce global emissions significantly and simultaneously. Despite this demonstrated demand and potential for driving investment, there are challenges for companies of all sizes trying to buy clean energy and power systems that historically have been built for fossil fuels. In some countries, this will require reforms that are unfamiliar, while in others, it requires infrastructure investments, like strengthening the electricity grid. The State Department and the Bureau of Energy Resources want to support American SMEs in meeting their climate commitments while helping to grow more profitable businesses at the same time. One of the most important ways we do that at the State Department involves increasing access to clean energy at affordable prices. And that's where ENR's Clean Energy Demand Initiative, or SEDI, comes in. Through SEDI, companies can signal their clean energy demand and investment potential to governments considering power sector policy reforms to help deploy clean energy in an affordable and reliable manner. Since SEDI's launch at COP26 last year, companies have indicated investment interest that could drive up to $100 billion in renewable energy infrastructure across 14 countries around the globe. These investments in clean energy infrastructure and policy reforms will not only benefit the larger firms leading this change, but also their local suppliers and other small businesses up and down the supply chain. Working through the SME Climate Hub, we hope that SEDI can help smaller firms that can't always lay out the cash required for climate-smart or energy-efficient technologies to obtain more reliable and affordable clean energy. As you all know well, electricity markets in the United States vary greatly, and as a result, there are many different ways that companies can purchase clean energy. US SMEs, therefore, have unique experience to share globally, and they will benefit with conversations with other SMEs as well as large corporate partners. I very much look forward to bringing that experience to bear within SEDI and the rest of the ENR team's efforts to advance our climate ambitions. Targeted policy to accelerate the energy transition and private sector innovation have a vast potential to address emissions, improve energy reliability, and create economic opportunity. In this regard, I want to commend today's panelists, Adore Me, Walmart, and MasterCard, for their work with SMEs to help unlock supply chains, and I very much look forward to hearing the discussions this morning. I wish the SME Climate Hub enormous success here in the United States, and I very much look forward to partnering with you to meet our shared economic and climate goals. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Assistant Secretary Pyatt, for setting the scene in such an eloquent way. And now I'd like to welcome on stage Justin Warland, our moderator, who's joining us as senior correspondent on climate from Time magazine, who recently launched their own climate action platform, CO2.com, with which we're partnering. Welcome, Justin.
Well, thank you for the introduction and for the invitation to be here. I think this is such an interesting conversation at an important time. I'm going to go ahead and just introduce the panelists just from next to me and then on down the line. Next to me, we have Jane Ewing, who is the Senior Vice President of Sustainability at Walmart, Ranjan Roy, who is the VP of Strategy at Adore Me, Payal Dalal, who's the Senior Vice President of Social Impact International Markets at the MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth. And then finally, we have Mayor Eric Simmons, who is the mayor of Greenville, Mississippi. I'm glad that we are following that presentation, which I think in many ways laid out elements of the business case in this moment for engaging SMEs on climate action. And I just want to go to each of you as sort of an introductory question to get your sense of the business case for what you're doing. And I'll ask the question in a slightly different way for each of you. But Ranjan, I want to start with you. You know, work at an SME. What is the business case for Adore Me to engage in climate action?
Yeah, so for Adore Me, we're a direct-to-consumer women's wear brand. We started in intimate apparel and now sell across a number of other categories. We were founded in 2011, and really relevant to this discussion, we did not start as a sustainable brand. It was not central to what we did. We own it, we're honest about it. In 2019, we started a real internal transformation to push every part of the company to be more sustainable. And it was at a time where we realized that this is the way the world's going. So, I mean, it was a bit idealistic, but it was also pragmatic. Idealistic in the sense that we obviously were a younger, more progressive company based in New York. We want to do good, but pragmatic in the sense that if you don't go in this direction, if you don't actually build your business in a specific way, you will be left behind. We kind of look at it as if you remember, digital transformation was all the rage in the early 2010s, and chief digital officers, that title peaked in 2016, and now is not as much of a title anymore. We think sustainability is going to go the same way, where it'll just be ingrained in every single part of your business, and businesses that are not on board and it's not directly integrated into everything you do, you will be left behind. And again, we did this. We were near 100 million in revenue when we had started this transformation, and now we're over 200 million. So we've shown that while scaling as a growing brand, you can really change the way you do business.
Great. Well, Mayor Simmons, I want to come to you next. In addition to being a mayor, you also have your partner in your own law firm, which is an SME in its own right. But I just want to ask you from a local government perspective, what is the reasoning? What is the business case for you to push local businesses to engage in climate action?
Yes, thank you so much for the question. And let me just say good morning, and I want to thank America is All In for having us and giving us an opportunity to speak. I not only represent the city of Greenville, Mississippi as mayor, but I'm also the co-chair of a group of mayors, a cohort of mayors on the Mississippi River Basin, from the headwaters of the Mississippi River, Bemidji, Minnesota, all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. It's a 102 bipartisan group of mayors called the Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative. I currently serve as co-chair with the mayor of Memphis, Tennessee, Mayor Jim Strickland. Climate performance throughout Middle America is in major flux right now. And we know we can't stop more than 2 to 3 degrees of warming by only addressing the energy sector of our economy. A whole society approach is necessary to reduce emissions. And I will get to that question regarding small businesses, but I want to just tell the audience about MRCTI and the type of work we're doing. Further, even if emissions are successfully reduced to below the 2005 levels, we will still be living with the impacts of climate change at least a half century. Thus, disaster mitigation should be a significant part of our strategy going forward. The Mississippi River Basin is the most important food-producing basin in the earth. 1 out of 12 folks consume agricultural commodities from the Mississippi River Basin. Our mayors are working at corridor scale to sequester over 300,000 tons of carbon through land management practices and projects across 8 states and 30 cities. We believe we can get President Biden's 30% closer to his non-energy sector carbon goals over the next several years, and that is just the beginning of our plans. Manufacturing, agriculture, and tourism all contribute to emissions. Agriculture accounts for about 1/3 of emissions alone, but all 3 of these sectors will need to be transformed in short order if we're going to make any progress. That is why our mayors on the Mississippi River Cities Towns initiatives are uniting through a new strategy. One of the regional significance whose common dependency on environmental services is the Mississippi River can motivate and measure climate performance with the co-benefits of clean drinking water, sustained fresh water, and also disaster resilience and economic security. Just last week, we had our annual meeting in St. Louis, and with our delivery partner, Ducks Unlimited, we announced 5 natural infrastructure and carbon sequestration regions from the concentration of Iowa, Illinois, Missouri, Kentucky, Arkansas, Tennessee, Mississippi, and Louisiana. Some of the projects are already underway, and others comprise of the largest American The Beautiful grant application in the nation. We have filed that application. Just if we look at the Inflation Reduction Act, and we really want to thank Mr. Secretary, the Biden-Harris administration, and the significant investments that they continue to make, not only in the bipartisan infrastructure, but with the IRA as well. But if you look at that, the most overt climate law that has been enacted is the Inflation Reduction Act. And we're anxious to look at the benefits and also the programs in that. But the bill provides funding for the EPA to establish Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund and to support several programs that provide financial incentives to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and other air pollution emissions. For example, the bill provides incentives to purchase or install equipment and technology to reduce pollution at the ports like those along the Mississippi River or in my city of Greenville, Mississippi. But the IRA Title 5, Part 5 discusses resources for transmission. This part is key. Most of the renewable energy potential of the continent is along or on the west side of the Mississippi, while most of the use of that energy is on the east side. So it is a transmission port, the Mississippi River Valley. The Mississippi River and the ports and the small businesses that we have can be a major transmission port for energy going across from the east and to the west side. And so I just want to just spotlight small businesses and what you're all doing, but you can use the Mississippi River Basin, but the small businesses on those ports to make sure that they're climate focused, but they're also in the fight to make sure they have a part in this climate issue.
Great. Okay. I want to move down quickly, and hopefully we can have a good amount of time for some questions, but to Jane, to ask you, it's sort of Walmart obviously does a lot of work down the supply chain on climate, and I just want to ask, what's the business case for that engagement with SMEs?
Great, thank you, Justin. Good morning, everybody. Small and medium businesses are critical for Walmart. Yes, we're a very large retailer, but they are our suppliers. They supply a lot of what's on our shelf. They're also our customers. So we believe we have a big responsibility to serve them in multiple different ways. Walmart's been on this journey to becoming more sustainable for many years. We've got some very bold, ambitious goals. But just Walmart delivering on those goals is not going to be enough. We know that. We've heard it many, many times over the past years. It's going to take everybody. So actually back in 2017, Justin, we set a goal to reduce or avoid at least 1 gigatons worth of emissions in our own supply chain. There's tools in there that helps them on that journey towards decarbonization. We have over 4,500 suppliers in there today, many of which are small and medium. And many of them don't have the resources that larger companies have. So we, a bit like we've heard with We Mean Business, we're there to help them on that journey. And lots more to do, but very proud of the progress.
Great. Yeah, I think we'll pick up on some of those threads in a minute. Payal, just to go to you to close these introductory questions. How does addressing climate change fit into the bigger picture that you do fostering SMEs?
Yeah, absolutely. So good morning, everyone. So I sit within an organization called the Center for Inclusive Growth, which is a unit within MasterCard. And what we're trying to do is drive inclusive growth, which means everyone benefits from economic development. Our focus for the last 9 years has been micro and small enterprises. So you'll hear me talk about MSEs as opposed to SMEs, because that's where we think the most help is needed. Now, our theory is that we know that micro and small businesses are the backbone to economies, but they're also the backbone to communities. They buy locally, they serve locally, they hire locally. And so as we're thinking about coming out of the pandemic, we really think that micro and small enterprises are going to be the key to a sustainable and inclusive economic recovery. And what we've been focusing on is on resiliency, specifically financial resiliency. And what we saw in the data was that micro and small enterprises had very little resiliency pre-pandemic. And then that resiliency and the lack of was exacerbated by the pandemic. And now we're seeing the impact of supply chain disruptions, energy costs, and inflation. And we have been following small businesses and micro businesses for years, and what they're telling us is they want to be resilient. They want to be able to weather volatility and shocks. They don't want to necessarily grow to be these huge enterprises. They want to survive and make a little bit more money. And so our work has been very much around how do we bolster the financial resilience of micro and small businesses. The key for us, our hypothesis, is that digitalization can be really effective, but increasingly what we're seeing is that in addition to looking at financial resilience, we're going to have to factor in climate resilience as well, because this is going to impact their financial resilience in the years to come. And so you can't really look at, if you're looking at the ESG framework, you can't look at the E in isolation to the S. You have to look at how planet plus people is going to equal prosperity.
Great. Well, that's a great segue, I think, into my first question. I imagine you talk to the average person running an SME, and their first question when you start talking about climate is going to be, how much does this cost? And so I would be curious to just hear some thoughts, and maybe Ranjan, I'll start with you, but just what do you say to somebody who's concerned about cost? How do you think about cost? How do you talk about financial resilience, not just about the cost itself?
Yeah, for us, cost is a huge factor because we're a proud mass market brand. Majority of our products are between $30 to $60. We serve consumers across America from all income levels. And so we don't sell sustainable products at a higher price than our regular products. We absorb the margin. So clearly, cost is vital to the way we approach this. But there's kind of two layers to this. One, there's basic things you can do that are outside of the individual level of a product's cost. And you have to look at the holistic picture. And an example is air shipping versus sea shipping. It's not often talked about when you think about what is the actual cost that I'm assuming, but air shipping can have 20 to 50 times the impact as sea shipping on the planet, but sea shipping is 5 to 10 times cheaper. So here you have a very simple thing where it's better for the planet and it's cheaper to engage in sea shipping, but air shipping is a nice crutch. It only takes 7 to 10 days to get the product from the manufacturer, whereas sea shipping, especially post-COVID, can take 60 to 80. So you have to be better at inventory management. You have to really step it up, and you have to really focus on building your supply chain in a predictable way, and it's difficult, especially in fashion. But there's so many areas that we've found where when you look at the whole picture, you can start reducing costs and be better for the planet. And you really need to look at the whole picture, because if you look at just a product by itself, the COGS will always be higher if you're looking at a new type of fiber or material.
Great. I'd love, we don't have that much time, but this is such an important question. I'd love to get other thoughts about this, if Payal or Jane, especially given your conversations with SMEs about this.
Sure. I couldn't agree more on so the sustainable choice has to be the affordable choice, both for suppliers and for customers. If it's too expensive, too elite, it's not going to happen. So I think that's a critical point. We've tried to offer tools and things, trainings and things that could potentially cost money. We offer those for free to our suppliers to help them on that journey. Something I'm really proud of is a partnership actually with HSBC that we have for our sourcing suppliers, and they can apply for access to reduced cost capital for investments in sustainable initiatives. And we've had really fantastic uptake of that, so helping them on that journey. And many more examples, but that would be the one that springs to mind.
Great.
Yeah, what I would say is, and 100% agree with my two fellow panelists, we have to be able to frame it as an opportunity rather than a cost, and help small and micro businesses see the longer tail, but also subsidize or defray some of that initial upfront cost. Because if you think about small businesses, and I think about the parallels to digitization, micro and small businesses are time poor and they're cash poor. So how do you tackle both of those while also incentivizing more sustainable behavior? And that's really tough. And we have to make sure that we don't put the onus entirely the micro and small business. We have to think as an ecosystem, what can we do to make it easier, more simple, and faster?
Great. Well, my next question, I'm curious, anybody who's been in the climate space for a while knows that it wasn't always a given that business would be so present in these conversations. And of course, a lot of that's changed thanks to groups like the We Mean Business Coalition. I want to ask, though, how can you, I mean, and the SME Climate Hub is obviously an example of this, but how can you foster that network effect with SMEs? How can you create that same kind of conversation, that same kind of dynamic where 5 years from now we'll be thinking, duh, of course SMEs need to be a part of this conversation. And I would maybe start with Mayor Simmons. You can draw on your experience with the network of mayors, and then we'll go around. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you have to incentivize for small businesses the opportunity to do climate work. Of course, they're looking at the bottom line, much like big business as well. But when you put in that whole equity piece, you got to think about those businesses that are less equipped to put in climate-focused strategies. And so from a local government, state government, and a federal government, you have to begin to incentivize that in a way where the rubric is different, of course. So if you go and try to get a small business loan for small businesses, I can tell you we had the vice president to come to Greenville to spotlight Biden-Harris administration's commitment to small business and small communities, because what we did during the height of the pandemic was gave $3,000 grants to women-owned businesses. And we did that because we wanted them to survive and thrive in our city, given the pandemic. You're gonna have to have innovative strategies like that, whether it's gonna be grants, whether it's gonna be loans, it's gonna have that rubric to say, if you do this climate action or you do this, you can get a lower interest rate. You're gonna have to incentivize that for small businesses, because if you do that, you'll build those sustainable communities in a country.
Great. Yeah, I want to definitely come back to government and incentives and things that can foster this. Pyle, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I just wanted to share that in our work around the world, what we have found is that micro and small businesses listen to each other. They don't listen top down. So if a government or an NGO or a corporate says, you need to digitalize, they're not really going to believe us. But if we connect them to other micro and small businesses who say, I adopted digital inventory management and it saved me X amount of money, it's been really helpful, they're much more likely to pay attention. So what we've done is created communities of micro and small businesses. So in Indonesia, in North Africa, and in the Middle East, we've created a program with Mercy Corps called Micro Mentor, where a micro business goes out and says, I need help with a business plan. Another micro business comes and says, here, let me help. And that peer-to-peer conversation is a lot more effective to drive change, especially behavior change. So as we're thinking about decarbonization and sustainability, I think we really need to take lessons from the digitalization movement to say, let's facilitate this peer-to-peer exchange rather than try to do it top-down.
Jane,
Can I just add something that we've found that we've gained real momentum from? We set some commitments to make purchases from US manufactured suppliers, but also minority-owned businesses. And that's galvanized, and they typically are small, some even micro. They maybe haven't sold to Walmart before. And we've set a program, it's called Open Call, and they can come and they can pitch their products. And it's now in its 8th or 9th year, and and we've got products on the shelf from some of these smaller businesses, and they're learning how to sell. We can start with a few stores, and they build and grow. And increasingly, more and more of the products have a sustainability component in them. So I think it's a win-win, and we look forward to continuing that.
Yeah, to build on the peer-to-peer communication as well, as a now medium-sized business that was small, I can tell you, when we luckily in 2019 started this sustainability transformation, the first thing we did was dig much more deeply into our supply chain, engage in conversations with manufacturers, really try to bring transparency to our supply chain. And when the pandemic hit, that not only saved us, that became our ultimate competitive advantage in trying to manage that volatility and unpredictability. It was such a huge advantage. And that kind of operational discipline, bringing it into the way you do business, even small and medium-sized businesses, I think everyone should take it upon themselves, because honestly, I don't envy Walmart having to do that across a supply chain of that size. Even for us at the level we were at when we started, it was a huge undertaking. So the earlier you can get started in that approach to doing business, the benefits will come out on the other side.
Yeah, I want to talk about customers. You mentioned, Ranjan, that you're that your customer isn't necessarily sustainability focused. How do you explain this to the consumer? Do you explain it to the consumer?
The customer question is very funny for us because if you Google sustainable fashion, you'll see, I ask everyone to do it later, like everyone's wearing kind of brown and green tones, looking wistfully into the distance.
On the top of a mountain.
Yes, on the top of a mountain, forest behind them. That's not us. We sell bright colored things. It's fun. Our typical consumers, they're not looking for sustainable fashion. And when we started overtly marketing sustainability, the reaction was either neutral or often negative because people assume it's going to become more expensive. They assume it has to look this certain way and I'm not part of that club. And to us, it's been this real journey of realizing that at a certain point, it's not about marketing the product and trying to convert your customer. It's just at a certain point making your products better and selling the same products at the same price, but just better. And we have to do that as a country, as a business community. You have to move more of the population into buying products in a better way.
So do you no longer brand it as sustainable? Is that on your website?
We have products that kind of are marked as sustainable, have very scientific language that our compliance lawyer has been very strict about. Like instead of like a big stamp saying eco style, it'll be like includes preferred fibers.
Right.
We're very very conservative on that measure because it's not even doing anything for us.
Right. I don't know, Jane, did you have thoughts? I mean, you obviously have a lot of customers, very diverse customers. I don't know if you want to come in on that.
Sure. I mean, there was a study by NYU about 2 years ago that said over half of the growth in consumer products is coming from products that have some kind of sustainability component. What we've also learned, however, there is a big gap between the intention of customers and the actual action of customers. So we have to make it affordable. We've talked about that, and we have to make it easy for customers. So it depends on the category, but we work in different ways. But we found that certifications are very important, particularly for some foodstuffs. You know, we work very hard to have our things like our private label tuna 100% certified, coffee, cocoa, tea, those kind of things consumers are aware, fair trade they're aware of. But we've got a lot more work to do in communicating simply to the customer to help them make good choices.
It's very, very interesting. So I want to talk, Mayor Simmons, you brought up incentives, and I want to just come back to that, maybe ask you and then get some others as well to just reflect maybe on what sort of incentives would be most helpful from government to help foster the work that SMEs are doing on their own and with support from corporate partners.
You know, you can see at tax abatements. And so right now, local governments, we give tax abatements if someone comes downtown, if it's an industry. And so what my council is looking at now, trying to push and be more climate focused, is look at tax abatements for companies who want to be more climate focused and have less emissions. We have a lot of business on our port, and quite frankly, they don't want to hear the word climate change. They just don't want to hear that. But they do understand when we have a high water event on the Mississippi River and their folks can't work and they can't make production and their bottom line is affected. So they understand climate change then. So you got to begin to think about it. You got to have a different type of label and talk to your businesses in a way you're going to push climate, but also businesses don't ever want to turn down any credit or abatement you're going to give them. And so if you be innovative from a local level, I think you can push that production and the bottom line for them.
Is the tax abatements that you're considering, are you calling them climate tax abatements? Or are you calling them resilience?
Resilience, we're still working on that.
Yeah.
Because, I'm a climate mayor, right. But I can't say everybody around my table are climate focused, and that's my council. And so you have to begin to navigate that to see ultimately what you're trying to do, how you're gonna help the end users. But also, I can mention that we just, in Greenville and in Rosedale, had a plastic initiative. We've been working with the United Nations Environmental Program, the University of Georgia, and a lot of folks, and especially our youth, came out and trying to do a debris out to look at what plastic is on the river as well. Folks will understand that plastic get in the waterways and they choke out our air. But our businesses, they donated money on that because they're getting it. They're slowly getting it. And we are in the Mississippi Delta, we're in rural Mississippi. And so, those labels have different meanings in a red state like Mississippi.
Right. I mean, what things are called is always such an interesting discussion, and I'm sure as this spreads, people will be thinking about those questions. I don't know if anyone else wants to come in on this question of incentives. What would you like to see from the government? We heard about that in the speech from the Assistant Secretary, but I don't know if anyone else has thoughts about what they'd like to see, perhaps what's going well that's good. Maybe Jane, I don't know if you...
Yeah, I mean, something I would add is innovation. Like, there are a lot of small, innovative startups out there trying to solve some of these biggest problems, whether it be building out the electric grid or innovative solutions to multiple different components of climate change, electric vehicles, like supporting that innovation, because many of the things are not scalable yet. And we're piloting a lot of different things, but some of the answers are not. They need funding and capital to get to scale. And I think if we can help some of these small innovators, maybe we get the next big companies for the future.
Payal, do you have thoughts, I mean, both on this question specifically with climate, but just what from government would help support SMEs more broadly, support the work that you're doing more broadly?
Yeah, absolutely. So a few thoughts, Justin. The first is, I'd really encourage all governments to partner with the private sector. Not only, I think, are we really good at innovation, as Jana said, but we're also really good at human-centered design, because that's what we have to really realize. Every micro and small business is going to be a little bit different. And even the micros are not a monolith. Even the smalls aren't a monolith. If you're urban versus peri-urban versus rural, if you're women-led, if you're male-led. And so we have to think really deliberately about the segmentation strategy when we're thinking about how we really promote sustainability. And I think the private sector is really good at thinking about segmentation and how you really design products and programs that cater to the needs of the micro and small businesses. So one, I'd say partner with the private sector. The second is just around working in tandem with the private sector so that we can create complementary initiatives. So I sit in the UK. The UK has a program, the government has a program called Help to Grow, which is all about enabling micro and small businesses to digitalize. And they give micro and small businesses vouchers of, I think it's £4,000 to buy technology. What the program doesn't do is actually help the small business decide what technology to actually purchase and then how to adopt it. What we see in all the research is the cost of something is not the only barrier, because adoption is very much about behavior change. So what we've done is we have, alongside the government program, offering free advisory services to the micro and small businesses participating in the program to say, here's a curated list of technologies that fit your business, and here, let's walk you through and talk you through over the course of several months how you actually embed it into your operation. So just a couple of kind of calls to actions and thoughts in terms of really driving sustainability at scale.
That's very, very interesting. I mean, on sort of the related note with regard to government, obviously there's been a lot coming out of Washington, both incentives, as we've been talking about, but also regulatory measures. I'm thinking of things like the SEC proposals on transparency and emissions footprints. I'm curious how this affects your thinking. I mean, when you're looking down the supply chain, do you think this changes the picture? Do you think this incentivizes all of this SME climate action that we're talking about? How? And maybe we'll hear from Jane, given Walmart's footprint, and we can get some other thoughts as well.
I hope so. I think we fully aligned with, we need to standardize, we need to make real progress. I think one area we have to be very cautious of, particularly even for us as a big company, it can become very onerous. We have resources and it costs a lot of money to do some of the measurements. So if it becomes too difficult or cumbersome, I think it's going to turn people away. So how do we make it for our small, particularly for everyone, but particularly for our small businesses, how do we make it easy to continue making progress? And I, sometimes worry that, perfection can be the enemy of progress. So that's why we launched Project Gigaton. We don't have a perfect way to measure Scope 3, but we know that the work is reducing the emissions and doing the right thing. So I think you've got to get this balance. Otherwise, we could stall if we don't do it right.
Yeah, for us, and this may be controversial, but We very much welcome regulation around the communication side, and the EU has actually been much more aggressive around greenwashing. And for us, the biggest problem, especially in fashion, which is a very marketing-driven industry, how people label and speak about their products, it becomes difficult to compete when one brand can call themselves sustainable and loudly proclaim sustainability credentials with very minimal substance behind that. And that has to be a regulatory push. That has to be standardized across the industry. There has to be punishment and rules around if you violate that. And that's actually one thing where we think the more comfortable everyone feels about how they're communicating things so they don't think they're doing wrong and they don't feel that their competitors are taking advantage, we think that could be a huge weight lifted off the shoulders of businesses like ours.
I'd just plus one what Jane said. I think we always talk about the financing gap when it comes to micro and small businesses. We know that cash flow is challenging. We know access to capital is challenging. I think what we don't talk about very much is how time-strapped micro and small businesses are. A micro or small business, you could have a few people and they're the chief marketing officer, the chief sales officer, the chief technology officer, and the chief bottle washer, right? And so when they're trying to make decisions about how to work on their business, they want something that's going to be fast and simple and easy. So we really have to work hard on taking, again, that onus on ourselves as an ecosystem to really make it easier so that the time piece doesn't become a constraint.
Where do you see who's in the lead, who's taking the lead, taking charge on this standardization element that you're talking about? I mean, how do you advise as a company in your supply chain or that you're working with as part of the Center for Inclusive Growth? How do you say, here's the standard, here's what you should be doing based on that standard, and perhaps it's not there yet?
We're certainly very early in our own kind of climate resiliency work with small businesses. And the first thing we're going to do, Justin, is we're bringing together a roundtable of small businesses to say, is this on your radar? If not, why? If yes, why? What do you actually need? And so I think that's the first step in asking if it's important to really understand where that delta is, and then find out what it's going to take for them to shift practices. So I don't know the answer yet. I could tell you a lot about what's going to take to digitalize, but I don't know what it's going to take to decarbonize. And so the first thing for me is to really listen to the voices of micro and small businesses and see what they actually want.
Yeah, and I would just add, no one company can set the standardization, right? It needs to be a collective, a collaborative with the right people around the table. And I think, just to emphasize the point you made earlier, or both of you, who's around the table is really important. It can't just be, big businesses, the government. You need some of the small minority businesses. We need to make sure that the transition is equitable and that we're thinking about things like environmental justice as we move forward. So I do think getting the right voices around the table. One of the things I was most struck with at COP last year was the voice of the youth. Mm-hmm. And there were several of them in very, very powerful. I mean, everybody knows Greta, but there were many others. And they said to a group of business leaders, they said, "You're starting to listen to us, but you're not giving us a seat at the table to help solve the problems." Mm-hmm. And that really resonated with me, and I think there's the solutions are out there. We've just got to get the right people around the table.
I'm curious how, this is an issue. Ranjan, you mentioned the way in which digitization went from having, companies went from having a chief digital officer to it being distributed and everyone having to think about this. I'm curious, how do you get over a knowledge gap where obviously right now people across your organization are probably not going to know all that much. Maybe it's different, but at your company, but generally people are not going to know all that much about climate change. How do you get over that knowledge gap? How do you inform them and help them grow into people who can think about climate?
Yeah, so this actually ties these two topics together in terms of filling the knowledge gap and the lack of standardization. One of the first things we did was we actually decided to create our own internal product impact matrix. And the creation team sat down with the supply chain and procurement team because we looked at the Higg Index, which at the time was the leading standardized model, and realized that it didn't really apply or take into account a lot of the intricacies of our products. And it was an incredible exercise. It was forcing everyone to sit there and go through and come up with something we felt confident in. And again, V1, now we're at V4. V1, when we look back, it's a little embarrassing and cringeworthy, but it forced everyone to sit around the table at our company and start learning, understand that regenerative organic cotton is better than organic cotton, that certain dyeing processes are better than others. It made us feel more confident when we engaged in conversations with our manufacturers or even within the industry, and without some kind of really direct engagement process like that, I think it would be a very different story. That it has to be from the ground up in certain ways, and honestly, especially the younger people within our firm, I mean, they were jumping at the opportunity to do this.
Who took the lead on that? I mean, that's really interesting.
Our chief operating officer kind of planted the flag that we're going to do this. I'm not going to say there was no resistance at first, because in terms of time scarcity, it was a lot of work, but it was more, what we realized was most of, again, going back to lack of standardization, most of the measurement tools out there were marketing driven, were there to allow you to say, this is good so I can sell it. It wasn't actually helping us, the company, understand our impact and actually better measure ourselves and improve. So once we realized that, we're like, all right, this is an opportunity where we can better educate ourselves and actually become a better company and better improve ourselves.
Mary Simmons, do you have thoughts about this? I mean, you talked about the difficulties in the region. I mean, how do you communicate?
I think it's just critically important to keep young folks engaged. Everyone has said it. They have to continue to be at the forefront of this fight. When we did the plastic pollution, and we had about 300 young folks there, but we made it relatable to them. We say, just breathe in and breathe out. You can't get on TikTok if you don't get this plastic out of the water. And so they can relate to that. And so when they're going out and looking to get plastic out of the waterways or getting debris, they can relate to that. And if you keep them engaged just at a very basic level, they're going to go home. They're going to tell their parents. And when they talk to their parents can be educated. Then if their parents educated, the community is educated, businesses are educated, the world can become educated. So you got to just keep it with youth at the center of the conversation.
Yeah, I imagine in large corporations, I mean, I don't imagine, I know in large corporations, youth are often taking a more aggressive posture and trying to work and help push their companies. I wonder if do you see inside your companies, what do you see as the way to educate people? I mean, is it youth? Is it a more comprehensive program? I mean, how do you think about that?
It's something you have to tackle every day in multiple different ways. I don't think there's one silver bullet, unfortunately. I think that leadership engagement is hugely important. Our CEO is personally very invested, and that makes a big difference. He talks about it all the time. He makes sure the expectations are clear. But as you say, it comes from the bottom up. The kids of our associates or our younger workers are also putting pressure on. So I think coming from both angles and providing information that is easy to understand. It's a huge learning journey. I've been in this space for not that long, and every day, sometimes I feel a bit dumber because you learn something new and you realize what you don't know. So you have to keep building that learning over time.
Yep.
And Justin, going back to your point around kind of the knowledge gap, I think we have to realize it's more than just education. This is truly about behavior change. Both of my parents have their own micro businesses, and they've had their businesses for 30 years. So if I ask them, okay, can you do your antiques business more sustainably? My dad's gonna look at me and be like, what? I've been successful, Pyle, shut up, right? And so we have to think about the gap between skills attainment and knowledge attainment to actually behavior change. And one of the things that works really well is not having a massive curriculum and modules, it's doing just-in-time nudges. Mm-hmm. So given that everything is transforming to the digital economy, how do we use digital platforms to incentivize sustainable behaviors? How at time of purchase, is there a little nudge to a micro business saying, hey, have you looked at their environmental standards? Just so that just in time they can think about, okay, might I change the way I act in this one decision quickly?
Great. We have, despite what the clock says, we have just 3 minutes left. I want to just ask, and I'm sorry I didn't give this to you in advance to prepare, but just one piece of advice, something that we touched on or something we didn't touch on that you would give from your experience to SMEs who are interested in engaging on climate. One thing you would say to them that you feel is something that would be helpful in their journey, and we can just go down the line starting with Jane.
I would just say, get started. Don't wait for the perfect plan. You just said, your first version was cringeworthy, and now it's pretty good. So get started and get all the help you can get around the table.
Great.
Yeah, echoing that sentiment that, again, we've really been using this analogy of digitization in the early 2010s. That's where we are in sustainability. And imagine not wanting to learn the skills that were required to become a more digital operator 10 years ago. That's where we are today. That's going to be the next decade. So the better you can position yourself and your business, the better off you'll be in the years to come, and we all will be.
I would just encourage micro and small businesses to tell us what they need. Tell the private sector, tell your government, whether it's a national level or state or local level, because we want to work with you to design what's going to work. We don't want to mandate this is what you need to do, because we don't live in your shoes. So tell us what you need and we'll design it.
And I would just simply say get involved. And SMEs around the country and around the world are the backbone of the world. And so if you get involved and do what these businesses are doing, not only would it be environmentally good and safe, ecologically safe, but also economically good and sound for your company.
Great. Well, it sounds like all four of you offered something very similar. Get involved, jump into it, say what you need. Thank you to this great panel. It was an interesting discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to all our panelists for such a lively and insightful discussion. And I, for one, am really excited to be working with all of them as part of our US campaign. And now I'd like to welcome our last speaker on stage, Maria Mendiluce, the CEO of the Women Business Coalition, for some closing remarks.
Well, thank you. I hope you have enjoyed the conversation. It's been a real-life conversation. So Women Business was created back in 2014 when the business and climate action were a little bit absent. And so we started with a group of pioneers that signed to the Science Based Targets Initiative and started to commit on climate change. And I see a lot of parallels with the SME group, because at that time, they were pioneers, and now they have a competitive advantage. So in the US, there are 30 million SMEs, and I strongly believe that early climate action is going to become their competitive advantage. So there are some pioneers that can lead the way. There are other companies where their suppliers, and we have their customers, are asking them to evolve. And what they need to do is very clearly, first, measure your emissions. We have a calculator in the SME Climate Hub. There are many other calculators out there. Just use it and start to measure, because emissions equal cost. So if you reduce your emissions, you reduce your cost. Learn about the solutions that you can use, because you're going to become much more resilient, because the world is going to be a much difficult place. Energy prices are very volatile, and some of the solutions provide that security against those increase of prices. And report progress, because the regulators are going to ask you to do so. The sooner you learn how to measure and report progress, the more prepared you're going to be for future regulations. So I want to thank you for listening to the speakers. I want to thank you, the panelists. And as they said, we need to spread the word. We need to help SMEs. They need to be aware that there are resources available for them to progress on their climate action. And I would argue that this is good because it makes business sense and it saves the planet, and not the other way around. Thank you very much.